Good afternoon and welcome to our next session. My name is Mike Mostow. I manage the federal market business at Everbridge and will be the moderator for our next speaker, who's from the U.S. Army. The topic for this session is how JARVISS, the Joint Analytic Real-Time Virtual Information Sharing System, which is developed and operated by Everbridge, is used to protect soldiers, the civilian workforce, and families during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our speaker today is the Army's Provost Marshal General and Commander of the Army's Criminal Investigation Command, Major General Kevin Vereen. Earlier this year, as the COVID-19 virus began to spread across the globe, the Office of the Provost Marshal General's Threat Analysis Team expanded their threat assessment to include the impact the virus may have on Army assets and operations. The focus of this session will be on how information technology systems, and JARVISS specifically, is used to increase situational awareness and aid in Army decision-making. If you have a specific question you would like to be considered, please enter it in the Q&A widget on your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, Army Major General Kevin Vereen.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Major General Kevin Vereen, as was stated before, Headquarters Department of the Army, Provost Marshal General. It is an honor for me to talk to you today on how the Army is actually doing this part to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus within its force and the civilian force, as well as our communities across America. Operating in the information age, it is also important for the Army to have success and to have quick and reliable data in order to make informed decisions. In relation to the threat information, the Army uses the Joint Analytic Real-Time Virtual Information Sharing System, known as JARVISS. Leveraging this technology in our response to COVID-19 has been invaluable. JARVISS desktop application accredited to store unclassified Army data and open source threat information from over 80,000 sources, including social media, news media, blogs, and governmental sources. It is an Army program of record that tracks the Army operating installations and standalone installations across the globe, including our recruiting stations, the Army Corps of Engineers, the National Guard, and other Army assets. It is a decision-making tool that provides information for commanders to view the real-time threat data geospatially and assess and understand the impact on Army assets. Earlier this year, when COVID-19 was emerging, the Office of the Provost Marshal General looked at the threat to the Army assets and began to track this virus using open source data layers in coordination with our system contractors. As the Army carefully conducts assessments across our post camps and stations, in collaboration with tools like JARVISS will enable senior commanders to make informed decisions that balance readiness, institutional development, and modernization to sustain and expand activities affecting beneficiary populations. Finally, we want to balance readiness with the health and safety of our force, which will lead to our success. Open for questions.
Thank you, General. My first question for you today has to do with how the Army has been using information technology to aid in the decision-making processes as it relates to COVID-19. Can you help us understand how the Army is using JARVISS specifically to track and assess the impact of COVID-19?
That's a great question. So JARVISS it's a push system. It's an information system that pushes information either through mobile application or through desktop. And so it's readily accessible for our commanders to be able to see actual information that may impact their installation, the surrounding areas that their installations are near, to include the regions, the counties, and the states that are all affected by the coronavirus.
Okay, and do you have an example or two of how Army commanders are using JARVISS to make better informed COVID-19 related decisions?
Yes, so one example that I will articulate for you is when the coronavirus really started in mid-March. And granted, we knew that there were challenges on the West Coast with regards to the virus. It was early March, potentially. And we had to make some decisions right off with commanders with regards to how they would actually allow their soldiers, based on the restrictions that they wanted to implement, allow their soldiers to be able to do certain operations. And so as we were looking across the globe, of course, the west coast of the United States was hit before the East Coast. So commanders out, particularly at Fort Lewis, Washington, which is one of our Army installations, were making decisions with regards to work restrictions, to whether they would bring their soldiers on the installation that lived off post, off the installation, and whether they would allow the soldiers that were currently on the installations to depart off the installations based on the environment and the conditions with the spread of the virus. And so these are decisions that commanders were able to make in order to ensure that not only our soldiers were protected, our soldiers and civilians that worked on these installations, but also that we would not allow the virus to be able to spread outside the installation, with our soldiers being released back into communities that were actually dealing with the virus at that time. And of course, if you look in time and space, the West Coast was significantly challenged with the virus way early before the East Coast. And so while Fort Lewis was going through the virus and making precautions to protect the civilians, the soldiers, and their families, here in the National Capital Region, primarily we were still at work until about the middle of March, and then we had to make command decisions based on what we were seeing as well.
All right, and can you talk to us about how Jarvis has helped inform decision-making during the pandemic as it specifically relates to Army training and readiness?
So first and foremost, the Army didn't stop training, and so I won't. That needs to be the first thing that I state. We did not just stop training when COVID-19 started. So what we had to do was we had to adjust and learn and figure out how to train in a COVID environment. And so so that's currently what we're doing. We're actually training in a COVID environment. So we are using all the precautions to protect our service members, to protect our soldiers as they're actually conducting training. Things with social distancing. We're actually spreading out our formations. We're limiting the amount of folks that are actually gathering in our formations. We're still doing PT, but we're doing it in small units. We're doing it in smaller elements, and we're just spreading out our force more than we have in the past. So we kind of, if you use the analogy, we're kind of keeping our soldiers in somewhat of a protective bubble. They're also preparing, they're wearing PPE. Our commanders are ensuring and enforcing that our protective gear is actually being worn. And we're doing everything just to keep our soldiers safe, still try to do individual collective training to a level where we can manage and control our force, but still accomplish the mission with training.
I expect that a pandemic may not have been top of mind for many commanders pre-COVID-19. Can you give us some examples beyond training and readiness of how the Army has had to adapt and remain agile to effectively respond during the pandemic?
So that's a really good question. The Army, of course, one of the things that we pride ourselves on early on was that we got to protect our force so that we can protect our nation when called upon to do so. And we had to do that very, very early on because our soldiers were going to be called to do things that we probably have not even thought about doing, but we were called to do things to be able to support our nation in a myriad of ways, and we were able to do that. One thing that I can tell you is that because of the coronavirus, we've been able to be really flexible and adaptive. We have had to go to dispersed operations, and that's not only here where I work in the Pentagon, but it's also across our formations across the Army. we had to go into a dispersed operations, and that really was a learning event for us. But it also fully prepared us to be able to react if we had to do this again. And we did not miss a beat, and I can say that because we've been able to meet the requirements across our nation, and we're still being able to operate. Now, granted, some things are a little bit slower than others when it comes to some of the administrative things that we have to do, and relying on technology, the way we have, it does have is pluses and minuses, but we've been very effective with trying to be adaptive and being able to adjust to the environment that we're currently operating in.
You mentioned real-time information earlier in the conversation. Can you provide us with an example or two of the types of real-time information that commanders rely on Jarvis for?
So the information that Jarvis pushes across our applications, really, it's information that occurs right there at the moment. Of course, social media is a great platform to be able to get information, but in some cases, it may not be valid. It may not be vetted. So these are real time, real live information pushes from our system that allows commanders to see on the spot how things are affecting their geographical location. For instance, if there was a hazardous spill in this, let's say, installation, I'll pick one, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the Fort Bragg leadership would get information through Jarvis that tells them there was a hazardous spill, real time, the location, and would probably give some precautions for our commanders to have to make in order to protect the installation, protect our soldiers, protect our civilians. But the information comes real time, and then they're able to react and they're able to form their force accordingly through other means, whether it's through desktop notifications. We have 911, we have our big voice, we have all those other notification mediums that we can use in order to truly inform the rest of our force. But commanders are able to make those decisions because of information that's coming real time over the virtual app or desktop.
Okay. The importance of that information is well understood. Can you provide an example or two of where the real-time information in Jarvis comes from?
So as I said before, we have over 80,000 different sources, different sites that feed into Jarvis. Most of our information, because this platform was primarily configured for law enforcement, most of the information comes through our law enforcement channels. Now, I would also say that it comes through news media as well. I mean, news outlets that get firsthand information on a particular incident, those feeds will come into Jarvis as well. It is a push system into application, pushed into mobile devices, but most of it comes through law enforcement channels. We started this platform on a criminal platform to actually watch crime and incidents across across the globe, across the United States, as well as overseas. And so a lot of this is incident in nature. It may be crime in nature, or an accident, just a vehicle accident may have caused some significant redirects of traffic. So a majority of this comes through our law enforcement community.
And along those lines, is Jarvis used mainly for the benefit of Army commanders and those focused on law enforcement activity, or is there also utility for smaller unit leaders or even an individual soldier using a handheld device, perhaps?
Yeah, so it is right now. It's a subscriber base. So we have subscribers who have to apply and ask for this app for Jarvis. We have been very diligent with trying to ensure that all of our commanders, our garrison commanders, our senior commanders at most of our higher echelons have this application so that they can access it. Our soldiers, I will just tell you, our soldiers are pretty savvy when it comes to technology and social media. And so what we've been able to use this is really to leverage commanders with information and allowing them to be able to notify through other means, through other platforms, to be able to notify their force. And that has seemed to work very well. What we really have been able to leverage is in our recruiting and Corps of Engineers, because most of our recruiting stations and most of our Corps engineer units are located outside of the confines of a military installation. In order to be able to provide capability to assess what's going on in their areas, this application has been very valuable. We want to make sure not only that our larger installations are safe, but our standalone installations and our unique installations and sites like our recruiting stations and our Corps of Engineer sites. All those commanders need to be equipped with this capability, and they're using it to be able to inform their force, because recruiters are out in the communities. They have to operate there. That's where they conduct most of their missions. Our Corps of Engineers are working on some of our facilities. They're in our communities, they're in our cities, and this allows the commanders to be able to use this to make decisions on how to protect their force. And if you look at those organizations, they're down to company commanders, battalion commanders being able to have access to this capability.
You mentioned email alerts, mobile push notifications, alerts to individuals, et cetera. Can you talk about how the Army is using JARVISS to alert individuals specifically?
So it doesn't. So for individuals, it's really, like I said, it's commanders based. It can be decentralized, and it can be de-scoped down so that the data that commanders are asking for can be specific to their geographical location. So it has a personal nexus to that individual that allows them to be able to make certain decisions with regards to their units in the geographical locations in which they serve. Now, I would also tell you the other side of JARVISS, which has been very productive for us, is that the ability to be able to see globally. They can pull information globally, not only just locally, but commanders can pull information globally that allows them to kind of see maybe trends or things that they may not necessarily have when you look at their locations specifically. But it allows them to do some mapping. It allows them to see kind of how things are progressing so that they can prepare themselves and also prepare the units. Just as a word of warning and information. But it is tailored for our commanders to be able to adjust and decentralize the information that they're receiving specifically for their own use.
JARVISS wasn't necessarily conceived with a pandemic in mind. Was there an additional cost to add the COVID-19 related tracking features to the system when they were needed?
So the cost was minimal. It is not a high cost. The good thing about it is we had the system already as a program of record. So all we did was really just added additional applications to be able to provide the analytics that we were looking for. I chalk that up on to our great folks who actually run the system. When we first started talking about the coronavirus, we really had to start looking at what capabilities we had, and then how we could innovate and how we can spiral certain capabilities in to achieve an end state. tied to the coronavirus. As I said before, early on, this platform was specifically geared to kind of give us a law enforcement sort of capability when looking at crime and crime trends and incidents across our nation and across some of our forces overseas, our installations overseas. But this has been invaluable to reshaping and readjusting to meet the COVID needs, and now giving us some situational awareness with regards to the virus, and helping us to allow a capability for commanders to make decisions and assess their force.
You mentioned social media earlier. When dealing with publicly available data, privacy is almost always a concern. How does Jarvis ensure the privacy of individuals is maintained when using information obtained from social media?
Yes. Yeah. So you were coming in a little broken, but I think I got your question. So Jarvis does not disclose any personal protected information. It does not disclose personal health information. So it doesn't give us that, identifiable information with regards to some person. What it does give us, it gives us everything else. It gives us what happened, gives us where it happened, it gives us the incident itself, and it gives us, in some cases, maybe how things have happened, so that commanders can actually get a pretty good assessment and be able to make decisions off the information that they're given. But to answer your question, there's no protected information that will be disclosed over the Jarvis application, which is good for us, because we want to make sure that we do not disclose the privacy of people in general.
Okay. And are there specific examples of how the Army is using Jarvis to keep personnel safe and aware during the COVID-19 pandemic?
So we do mapping. It has a special application that allows us to see kind of where which states are actually maybe spiking up, which states are actually streamlined or at a steady state, and which states are trending down. And it allows the commanders to be able to now make adjustments to our health protection conditions, and that is varied across our post camps and stations. There are some states right now that in some cases are lowering the health protection conditions. There's some states that have higher health protection conditions, and they're not lowering based on the environment. But it is giving our commanders the ability to be able now to kind of make some decisions on how to adjust the health protection conditions. But I will also say that this is in concert with the states, and we're not going to get ahead of opening up our ability to be able to move around and to throw aside all of the protective measures that we're putting in place to protect our force and our civilians, and our families. But it's also allowing us to kind of see as things are trending by state, commanders can kind of start planning and putting plans in place to make adjustments accordingly. But in accordance, of course, with the way the states are adjusting their orders as well.
Okay, because we're bumping up against our allotted time, I have just one more question for you, a very general one. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the people on this call this afternoon?
So the thing that I do want to share is that our Army is extremely busy. We have been busy. We have not ceased since the start of the coronavirus, and we're really focused on ensuring that we protect our force, so that we can continue to protect our nation. The second thing I do want to say as a final is that we've been very flexible, and we've been adaptable, and we have adapted to the conditions our mission. Because at the end of the day, our Army was built to fight and win. And in order for us to be able to do that, we have to ensure that our force is protected. So when called, we're calling to do, and we're doing what we need to do now to protect our nation. But we also have to protect our nation in other areas as well. And we cannot lose fact of that at the end of the day as well.
Thank you, General. I'd like to thank you again for your insights today, and also thank the audience for attending this session. For the audience, please feel free to reach out to the Office of the Provost Marshal General, Anti-Terrorism Division, at the email address that's included in General Vereen's bio on the upper right-hand portion of your screen. If you have any questions on Jarvis or for the Army, for more information about Everbridge, please refer to the resource widget on the lower right-hand portion of your screen. This concludes this session of the symposium.